Welcome to the north coast of Ireland again. This time I'm down in Portstewart, and in today's lesson we're going to be talking about using filters, both graduated filters and also standard ND filters, when to use them, how to use them, and why to use them. So yeah, let's get cracking. So one of the most popular filters that a landscape photographer will have in his bag is the graduated filter, and as the name suggests, it's graduated from light to dark. At least this one is. It's a standard ND soft edge grad. By soft edge, what it means is the graduation. So here we have clear, 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 starting to get darker, 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 dark, 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 dark. Basically, that's your graduated. And what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to place the filter over the horizon, over your landscape, to balance the foreground with the sky. So of course, people are arguing these days on photography forums and online, and conversations that I'm having with fellow photographers, do you still need a graduated filter? Today's camera sensors are getting ever more advanced, meaning the dynamic range that's captured in a particular image by a particular camera means that you can probably pull out the highlights, bring up the shadows from a single raw image. Or of course, why not shoot multiple exposures? All of these have merits, of course, and I find myself from time to time doing a mixture, but I still would not be without my graduated filters. I do believe that allows me to visualize what the scene looks like. It allows me to capture in one image what my eye is actually seeing. So, with that said, how do you go about using one? Well, basic premise is what you want to do is take an exposure reading for your foreground, and then take an exposure reading for your sky. That will give you the dynamic range between your foreground and your sky. At that point, it's then up to you whether you have this memorized, you use a cheat sheet. I use a little app called ND Grad Calc, and you can plug in your exposure reading for your foreground, your exposure reading for your sky, and then that will tell you the type of filter that the type of grad that you want to use. This is actually a two-stop graduated filter, and it's a soft edge, meaning that the actual graduation gets more pronounced as we go up the filter. I should probably get myself a hard edge grad as well, now that I'm living by the sea. A hard edge is basically, as the name would suggest, a hard stop between dark and light. So earlier on, I took a couple of exposures for the foreground and for the sky, and that was telling me that I should use a two-stop ND filter. And so that's exactly what I did. What I'll show you now is, as I position the grad over the front of the lens, the one thing that we have to be very cautious of is where the effect takes place. Too high, and it won't have any effect whatsoever. Too low, and we'll actually start to darken our foreground, which is not what we want. So let's go ahead, put this in, and see what effects we can have using the graduated soft edge filter from Format High Tech. So what's the difference between a graduated filter and a standard ND filter? Well, it's pretty straightforward. I showed you the graduated filter, which, as the name would suggest, is graduated dark to light in either a soft edge, sort of gradual darker to light, or a hard edge where it goes straight from clear to dark. A standard ND filter is completely dark, and again, they come in various stops of light. They come in various darkness. So this is actually a 4-stop ND filter. And what this allows you to do is actually increase the shutter speed even when we have bright conditions such as this. So right now, I've got the camera set to 1 second exposure, and I'll go ahead and take a shot without the ND filter in place. Quite bright, I think you'll agree. Now, again, if I now place the ND filter in front of the screen, in front of the lens, and take another shot, slightly better. But hang on, what about the sky? Well, again, this is where you've got to remember what we talked about earlier with the graduated filter. Even though you're using an ND filter, what the ND filter is, it's giving you an overall reduction in the stops of light reaching the sensor across the whole frame. But of course, there is still a difference in brightness between the sky and the foreground. So quite often when you're using an ND filter, including the sky in your shot, you'll also need to play with the graduated filter as well and actually stack them. What I normally do, and what is good practice, is to put your ND filter closest to the lens and then your graduated filter in the next slot out. So let's do that. So already on the back of the screen I can see that ND filter is overall darkening the scene. I'm still at 1 second exposure, and now my graduated filter is balancing the sky. So let's fire off another 1 second exposure. Much better. So I have a 4-stop ND filter, a 10-stop ND filter, and a 16-stop ND filter. When would you want to use each of these? Well, unlike the graduated filter, which actually has a more technical reason for its use, i.e. balancing the foreground with the background, the foreground with the sky, ND filters are more in regards to your creative eye, how you actually want the scene to look. As you increase the ND filterage in front of your camera sensor, in front of the lens, it'll allow you to actually open up the shutter for a much longer period of time. So in this case, with the 4-stop ND filter, I'm able to take a 1 second exposure in bright conditions, it's around 8:30 AM, and still get a correctly exposed image. Now, why would I want a 1 second exposure? Well, with waves, there's a couple of ways that you can actually play with the look of waves in a photograph. I actually quite like waves where they go misty. I also like waves, the look of waves in an image where you still get a little bit of the power and the dynamism of those waves. Now, getting that power and dynamism in those waves is where I would shoot with the 4-stop ND filter, because I want a shutter speed of around 1 to maybe 2 or maybe 3 seconds. Now, what the camera is telling me is I need to have a 1 second exposure to correctly expose this image. But what if I wanted a 2 second exposure? Well, if I were to put the 10-stop on, it would require a much longer exposure. So this is where I probably want to play a little bit with my aperture. Right now, I'm shooting at f11. I've just increased my aperture to f16, still with the ND4 4-stop filter on, still with the graduated filter on. However, now on the back of the screen, I'm seeing that a correct exposure is around 2.5 seconds. So let's fire that off and see what it looks like. And that looks quite nice. The difference between a 1 second and a 2.5 second. And again, this is where your own artistic eye, your own artistic feeling comes into play. There's no right or wrong answer here. This is where you can actually play a little bit with what you're looking for. Very important, however, that you're watching the waves. Don't just come into a scene, put in your ND filter and start clicking the button. Watch the pattern of the waves. Decide when the shutter should be tripped. I'm watching now and I'm seeing the waves kind of wash over the little stone steps. Do I want to fire the shutter now like I just did and the water is actually washing away from the steps? Do I want to fire the shutter now when there's no waves actually breaking over and you just get the movement of the sea? Or do I actually want to fire the shutter when the waves are actually breaking over the far rock? Like now. Again, there's no right or wrong answer here. This really is down to your own artistic eye. So that's a 4-stop ND filter. A lot of fun, giving you sort of average 2-3 second exposures. Really nice for waves where you still want to keep the dynamism. Really nice for waterfalls as well. Okay, let's play with a 10-stop. Okay, now we have the 10-stop. Now, obviously, this is the Firecrest ND3, so 10-stop neutral density from Format Hi-Tech. Beautiful piece of glass, expensive piece of glass, guard it with your life. So one of the first things that you'll notice on the filters, although the Format Hi-Tech, you actually have to put it on yourself, is these little foam gaskets on the back. As you start to play about with the square filters, especially the ND10 and above filters, one of your biggest problems is going to be light leaks, because now we're keeping the shutter open for sometimes minutes on end. So, similar setup. I still have the ND graduated filter in place to balance the foreground with the sky, but I'm now going to slot in my 10-stop filter. So we have our 10-stop ND filter in place. We have our graduated 2-stop ND filter in place. So what's the exposure time supposed to be? Well, a correct exposure that I was getting before was a 20th of a second. And now what we want is, we're obviously reducing 10 stops of light. So I actually use another little calculator here called ND Calc. And this is telling me that for a 10 stop, we want 50 seconds. So I've actually had it going on bulb mode for the last 49, 50 seconds. I've just hit to stop the exposure. And that looks pretty nice. Now, the one thing that I would say is, even though that the gaskets are there to help protect from light leaks, quite often when I'm shooting with a 10 stop or greater ND filter, I take additional precautions for light leaks. So let me set that up now. Fashion myself some light leak protection. So here we have our patented light leak protection. Just helps to reduce some of those light leaks. Now, if you're using a digital SLR at this point, you might want to also consider covering the viewfinder, because of course that's where light leaks can come in as well, in through the viewfinder as well. Not so much of a case on our mirrorless buddies. So I'm going to shoot again for 50 seconds. I might actually just increase it just a little bit. Again, the ND or the ND Calc application just gives you a bit of a feeling as to what that exposure time should be. So we're at 35 seconds. I'm going to let this run this time for about a minute, between sort of 50 seconds and a minute. The sun is just starting to put through as well, a bit higher in the sky, and that of course is lighting things up a little bit more as well. So that's us now at 50 seconds. I'm going to let this go for a full minute. And that looks rather nice. Nice balanced sky, nice interest in the foreground, and of course, nice misty waves. Now very similar to what we did with the 4-stop. We can also play with our aperture to allow us with a 10-stop to get variable shutter speeds. So if I wanted to increase that to say 1 minute 30, 2 minutes, I would stop down, maybe shoot at f16. Now of course at this point then you're thinking, well of course I also have to think about my depth of field. I'm shooting here on a very wide angle, so even at something like f8 I should still be able to get very good depth of field. So perhaps a minute is too long, so I would bring my aperture to f8. That might give me a sort of a 30-second exposure. In fact, let's give that a go now. Let's get our camera down to f8, our aperture set to f8, and we'll fire it, and then we'll refer to our ND Calc application and see what the shutter speed should be. And we still haven't been washed away, so it's bonus. So we now have the 16-stop ND filter in place. And this is where you've got to be very patient. I've kept it at f8 for now, just for the purposes of this demonstration. So of course now we're reducing 16 stops of light, and again we were shooting at about a 40th of a second. So my little calculation now is telling me about 250, 260 seconds. We're currently at 90 seconds. Okay. I realised that in between talking to you guys and shooting up the exposure, I hadn't actually calculated the base exposure, which basically even at 250 seconds resulted in a very underexposed image. So let's do that correctly this time. Basically, I have the base exposure was a 60th of a second. Sorry, 100th of a second. 16 stops of light. However, I'm now going to control the overall exposure time by also using my ISO. So I'm still shooting at f8, but now I've increased my ISO to 320, which of course will mean that I don't have to let the exposure run the full length of time. I think I'm still going to have to let it run probably for about 6, maybe 7 minutes. We've been going for 4 minutes now. But this is one of the things I love about the long exposure photography side of things, is it gives you time to consider, it gives you time to slow down. You know, it's allowing me just to, you know, not just rush in and actually make the image and rush off again. It's also allowed me time to have a sneaky peanut M&M, which I brought home from the cinema last night. Right, back to this. Okay, so that's me pretty much done with the tutorial. I'm going to carry on making some images, One of the things that you'll have noticed there between the 10 stop and the 16 stop is perhaps not too much of a difference. And of course this is where your own, as you develop your artistic eye, you'll be able to decide what you feel is better. A 4 stop, no ND filter whatsoever. A 4 stop, keeping some of that dynamism in the waves. A 10 stop, bringing out the mistiness and starting to show some movement in the clouds. Or the extreme with the 16 stop, where depending on the scene you may actually get some more dramatic effects. Just a couple of things to bear in mind. Remember about the light leaks. I use my little patented, actually it's just one of those really. Use what you want, scarf, a hat, whatever. But light leaks, use whatever works for you. And just be careful of those light leaks. Check the back of the camera often whenever you've made the exposure. ND filter goes in first, and then any graduated filter goes into the second slot. Pretty much always will need to use a graduated filter as well when you're balancing the sky and the foreground, even when you're using an ND filter. And when you're exposing 2, 3, 4, even 5, 10 minutes, take the time to consider your environment. Take the time to consider the location you're in. As I've said before, it's a privilege being out, surrounded by Mother Nature, in this beautiful landscape, the north coast of Ireland. Well, I'm going to carry on making some images, try not to get swept away, and then I may go grab a cup of coffee. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I'll throw up some additional images at the end. As always, any questions, let me know. And please subscribe. I try to publish at least one video per week, be it from the field like this, or some of my own sort of musings. But go ahead and subscribe, and you'll get updates when I post a video. For now, though, I think I'm going to take my chances out on a little spit. Wish me luck, and have a great day. Bye-bye.